Welcome, everyone, to another American Philanthropic Scotch Talk. We're really happy to have you with us. I'm seeing the participant count go up on my handy dandy Zoom screen here. So I know people are still filtering in, so I won't get as formally started just yet, but appreciate everybody being with us. The conceit of these webinars, I guess you'd call them, is that it's a casual conversation. It's meant for people with a broad diversity and level of experience. So whether you're totally new to fundraising, or especially foundations fundraising, or whether you are an experienced advancement executive at a university, which I know there's at least one of you with us, hopefully you'll get something out of this today. Just a casual conversation. We have the ideas like over a Scotch, which I do have. I got like a quarter shot or something like that, probably for 2:00 Arizona time on a random Thursday in January. So I don't have a problem. You do not need to alert the authorities. We're keeping it under control here today. But hopefully, if your day is coming to an end, maybe you have something nice in front of you too. Aaron, I saw you lift your glass.
Yeah, I got a little Glenfiddich going here. Nice, kind of low mid shelf, space side region, nice and smooth.
Yeah, almost the working man Scotch. I wouldn't go that far. Abigail, do you have anything today?
I'm sporting a big canteen of water. So
so responsible of you. Yes, as I said, I got like a quarter shot of Lagavulin here myself. So we'll get going. I'm going to introduce Abigail and Aaron. We'll have a conversation and kick it off with questions, but we want to hear your questions. Ideally, put your questions, if you have any, in the Q&A. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Yeah, that's where I know I'll see it. If you put it in the chat, I might also see it too. I'm going to try to look at both of those things as we go here, but we'll kick it off. We'll start asking your questions as soon as we get your questions, pretty much, about anything you want to ask about foundation fundraising. Abigail Alberti is a longtime colleague of mine here at American Philanthropic. She was with us at the very, very beginning. Then she left, and then she came back, and we're super, super happy to have her. Abigail is one of our senior consultants, and she is speaking to us today from Champaign, Illinois. How are things in Champaign?
well, I'm actually in Ohio right now at my parents' house, but I do live in Champaign, Illinois.
I thought we covered that you were in Champaign today. All right. Well,
I'm sorry.
You didn't even need to admit that, but this speaks to your fundamental honesty.
Right.
That,
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah.
But Champaign, Illinois is a great little town, small town, central Illinois, surrounded by cornfields. I love it.
If they were only 15 miles to the east in the great state of Indiana, it would truly be a wonderful place. Yes. And have pretty decent basketball team this year at the University of Illinois.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Aaron Brown, I believe, is in Atlanta today, unless he's also misled me.
Well, we say Atlanta. Everything's Atlanta to anyone outside of Georgia.
Yeah, right.
I'm in Hall County, so I'm north of Atlanta. But,
okay. Are you north of where the Braves play, or?
Yeah, northeast of there.
Okay, so you're definitely not in Atlanta. You're in the Atlanta.
We don't call it Atlanta, but people outside the state do.
Okay. All right. Well, I apologize. Aaron is one of our managing consultants, and both Aaron and Abigail have a lot of experience writing grants to private foundations. We were talking earlier; they both worked on 7-figure grants and have gotten and have won multiple good-sized 6-figure grants. So if that's kind of the area you're playing in, they can speak to that. And then we've all worked on 5-figure grants and gotten 4-figure grants. So if that's the area you're playing in, we can speak to that as well. So let's jump in. Let's start at the very beginning for people who are new to this. Aaron, let's just give this to you.
Sure.
What is a foundation? How important is the foundation sector to kind of the revenue puzzle for most nonprofits?
Yeah. So starting real basic, right? A grant making foundation, it's an organization, it's an entity that's established to fund the work of other nonprofits. They give to a lot of different interest areas or areas of nonprofit work. Their founders and trustees are are very involved in making that decision on where those funds go. But at the end of the day, right, they're grant making entities to fund nonprofit work. There's different tax advantages to putting your money or establishing a grant making foundation. But that's what they do at the end of the day. When we talk about foundations in our space, largely we're talking about independent foundations. Right. There are corporate foundations, there are community foundations. Those are organized a little bit differently. So when we say grant making foundations today, we're largely going to be talking about quote independent foundations. They're the most common and also give away typically the most money. It's an incredibly important piece in the fundraising sector in the puzzle that you're talking about, Jeremy. I was looking just the other day that giving by non-corporate foundations made up about 19% of charitable giving in the US in 2020, which is about $88.5 billion. This, of course, you're talking about foundations that have hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and endowments, and ones that are much, much, much smaller. But when you put them all together, they still play a very large part of giving. And interestingly enough, I worked with several groups that were maybe more inclined to not pay as much attention to foundations because they are, and we'll get into this in a few minutes, their submission process, getting money from them at the end of the day can be a lot more involving. But you look at 19% and you go, oh, well, that's not a huge number. Okay, well, would you be able to function without 19% of your budget? And we would all say, absolutely not. So yeah, are they making up the large bulk of it? No, but they are a very, very, very key role. The last thing on this too, again, kind of just a basic overview here is that foundations in the United States are required under nonprofit law to give away 5% of their fair market value of their endowment. There's some complexities in how this is calculated, but that's what it boils down to. So they are required to maintain their status to give away every year 5% of what they have.
Yeah, that's their job. They got a tax advantage by establishing this foundation, right? And so it is their job to give away this money. They have to. Some of them give away far more than 5%, not enough of them do, frankly, in my opinion, but some do. Sometimes some of them have trouble meeting that minimum requirement, but that gives you a sense of what they have to get rid of. So that's very helpful, Aaron. I just want one thing, you had 19%, that's across every kind of nonprofit in every sector, just everybody.
Correct.
The kind of nonprofits that we tend to work with at AmPhil, just for whatever it's worth, these are ones who we rarely work with people who get much government money, for instance. That means the percentage from foundations is even higher. In our latest survey, which was 2019, in our so-called fundraising performance report, it was 37% of revenue, contribution revenue for the nonprofits who participated in our survey. 37% came from foundations. So it's a big piece of the puzzle. Abigail, we're going to get to the first question we have is like, how do you find foundation prospects in a second? But let me just ask you, Abigail, first. So what are the pros and cons? So why, Aaron kind of just touched on there then, like some people think maybe sometimes it's not worth the effort, but it's a little bit harder to apply for foundation support than it is to ask Bob for money. What are the pros and cons here?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it actually, my first point here actually partly answers the question of how do you approach a prospective foundation,
right? Because
the fact of the matter is that you can find well-aligned foundations relatively easily. If you think about like major individual donors, their giving is oftentimes private. You might not know like what they give to, if they're aligned, if they'd be interested in what you're doing. But foundations, their giving is all public. You can look up their 990s. It's relatively easy to do that. It is time intensive. So maybe that's a con, but you can pretty easily find foundations that support causes that are similar to yours.
And let's just pause on that since it's an actual question. Where do you find these 990s? Are there tools that gather them all together for you and make them searchable?
Yes. Yeah. So Foundation Directory is a great resource. GuideStar, which I think is free. Someone correct me if I'm wrong there. I think you can create a free account. Searchable. You can find 990s there. Foundation Directory is better because you can actually search like keywords within a 990, and you can search like, what organization or what foundation supported like this nonprofit, which is sort of like ours. And I can think, I would think that if they supported that nonprofit, they might be interested in what we're doing. So I think Foundation Directory is probably the best. It's probably the most sophisticated tool to do that sort of thing. So that's a pro, that's an advantage to foundations. You can find well-aligned potential funders.
Jeremy,
And-
could I jump in
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Abigail, could I jump
Go
in real
for
quick, just to take it one more step back if we want to go super basic and talk real quickly what a Form 990 is?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so these foundations are required every year to file an IRS Form 990, which lays out where, amongst a lot of other information, talking about their current assets and who serves on their board and who's on their staff and how much they're paid. This is all public information. The key thing there is that also listed on there is who they make their charitable contributions to and how much. And this is, again, public information. So it's a great starting place for research.
Yeah. And it's, it can be time intensive, but it's also an easy thing to really task out to like an intern or something like that, with a little bit of training, tell them what to look for on the 990, who's the main contact, what are their assets, what size of grant do they give, are they giving like, a bunch of $1,000 grants all in like, Texas, and you're a nonprofit in another state focused on like state level, maybe they're not a good fit for you, so, looking for those key things within, what are their board members, who's the, is the main contact a donor, or is it like an admin person? You just get so much intel from a 990. So those are really gold. But that's a pro, what major donors, major individual donors, like have a 990 that you just like look up, while they're giving. So that can be,
they don't.
they don't. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's the way you find individual donors is much harder and more, it requires a lot more different tricks in your bag.
Yeah.
Than foundations. So I'm going to ask, we have another question here in the Q&A, and I'm just going to stick with you, Abigail, on this because it grows right from what you were talking about, pros and cons. So one of the cons is it takes a lot of time and completing a grant application. Sometimes foundations have portals online. You have to go through, you have to follow very specific kind of guidelines, and it takes time. There's no doubt about it. It's and it's not so copy and pasty as maybe you could do with certainly not with mail, like for instance, right? You have to customize it. So that's a con, but as Aaron pointed out, if it's 19% at the low end, up to maybe 40% at the high end of the revenue puzzle, it's still probably worth it.
Yeah.
But we have a question for one of our guests here saying, well, what about the possibility of mission creep? So I think this is a question that comes up with a more sophisticated nonprofit. You've got a staff, you've got a budget, you got to hit, and so how do you avoid just like, well, we could do a program in Oklahoma. I mean, we don't do a program in Oklahoma now, but who's to say we couldn't, right? Or really what we do is childhood education when you really think about it, because zoos, children come to zoos. And I mean, we've all had these conversations. What do you think guide rails or guardrails should be in place to keep that from happening?
Yeah.
What's your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. This comes up all the time because a lot of foundations tend to be like really focused on specific things, like, some are more general, not all foundations are like this, but some will like fund. We only fund like these types of projects, or like this very particular kind of work or whatever. And it can be really tempting if your work sort of overlaps with that to like tailor this proposal to kind of like, just to get some extra money in the door or whatever. But I mean, I think this question just really comes down to like, you just have to like apply some wisdom to it, and some honesty about what your work is as a nonprofit. Like, is this truly going to just like, what is our core work? Is this really going to distract us from what we're doing? And I've seen that answer go both ways. I've seen some organizations apply, get something that kind of specific from a foundation, and it is aligned enough that it doesn't do that. I've definitely seen the opposite though, where you get a grant and it really is like
all of a sudden,
frankly, because like now you have to you have all these like grant requirements and reporting, like you can't do it because you're trying to just like fulfill the core of your mission. So
I guess my guardrail would be, here's this. Let me suggest this. The two guardrails would be, does the program staff think this is a good idea? If your leader of your program staff doesn't think it's a good idea, you shouldn't go for it. They're the ones who are going to have to staff it, right? And the last thing you want, there's already inherent tension between the development staff and the program staff oftentimes, and so you don't want to introduce more of that. They should sign off on it. And second is your leadership, your president, your CEO, right? If they sign off on it, then hey, go for it, right? But if they don't, don't. You know,
Yeah.
but then they know. Then maybe that's another conversation about how you're going to reach your budget and that sort of thing.
And can I add one more thing too? And like, there's a lot of foundations out there, so move on. Find other
That's the
other
other thing.
funders.
You're
Like
exactly
just,
right. People get stuck on foundation something, but there's
Yeah.
there's so many more, and there's so many individuals and corporations and stuff. So yeah, don't force a fit. On the other hand, I'm going to say this to our questioner, and this person probably knows it because it's such a sophisticated question. A lot of times, a foundation will say, "You guys know this. We support this," right? Then you look at who they actually support, and it's actually kind of over here. It does not totally fit. So you have to look at both those things, and then they might be open to over here. So sometimes it's worth putting in if it wouldn't be mission creep on your part. Say, well, I know they don't. They say they don't do zoos, but they are in town, and so knows them on our board, knows so and so on their board, and maybe that bank shot will help us here. Just put it in. Just put it in. If it's not one of these super complicated Gates-like proposals, maybe that's still worth the time. I hope we're answering your question. Thank you.
I can even add more to this too. I mean, this also underscores the point. This is a big general point with foundations, is just, communication with them, asking them questions, trying to engage with them to really understand like what their purpose is, what their, how they give, what their vision is, like getting, doing the research, getting information and interacting with them as people, as human beings, because you just never know, and another thing too about foundations, this is kind of a con, but I guess it could be a pro, is that, their board priorities sometimes change, and their giving focuses can change over time. So it's worth pursuing conversations, right? And then kind of applying what you said, Jeremy, about the guardrails, if it gets to, a proposal stage.
Come back to this relationship building with foundations thing. It's really important. I want to linger on it a little bit. Let me go to Aaron. We do have another question. We're going to get to you, by the way. Thank you for your question. But Aaron, let's back up again. And we'll go away from the sophisticated, how do you put up the guardrail? Some people, I don't even know what a foundation is. What are the, they're really, we think about foundations as there are really two main categories. What are they? How does that work into all of this?
Sure. So we think about foundations as two buckets: staffed foundations and unstaffed foundations. Staff foundations are exactly what they sound like, right? They have a staff who helps run them day to day. They have someone who is in charge, a director or a VP, maybe depending on their size, who's working very closely with the board. They have people who are reviewing all the grant proposals that you're putting in front of them, who are making decisions on the spending, even after the board has made their own decisions, who are making sure that checks go out, who are meeting with potential grantees. And this varies. There are some staff foundations that are incredibly large. They have massive endowments and, 30, 40, 50 people staffs. And then there's others that they're still staffed, but they're maybe more modest, still a lot of money in play, but maybe not quite that many people who work there. The benefit to a staff foundation is that you have someone you can work directly with. If you are a decent fit just based on their giving and the program project or your organization is a potential grantee, you're going to have someone there, whether it's a director or maybe you have multiple directors who work with different potential grantees, who you can be in touch with, who can answer those questions for you, who can guide you through the process. Yeah. To kind of go back to that pros and cons thing, though, the other part of staff foundations is because of the nature of their size and what they're giving to, they often, not always, but often have a more involving grant submission process. The pro to that is you usually have someone who can help guide you through it.
Right.
You have someone who's
they have invented reasons for them to have jobs. In other words.
Exactly.
There's a process here.
Right. And on the unstaffed side, these are typically family foundations. This is an individual, maybe a couple who have established this as just a charitable giving vehicle for themselves. Maybe they have an assistant who helps them with paperwork. They of course have outside counsel and stuff who are helping them with all the back end legal stuff to running a foundation. But by and large, it's one person, maybe two people. Maybe it's a small family where it's the siblings are on the board as well, or the sons and daughters are on the board as well. They tend to, and again, not always, but often have a less formal submission process. It tends to be less involving. The downside to that is the guidelines are not always immediately clear on how you get in touch with them, what they're looking for. They don't have a staff that's working day in and day out. So getting a meeting with them or a phone call with them can be difficult. They're harder to reach. They tend to be smaller, but not always. Sometimes there are very large foundations that have one or two people who are running the whole thing.
So the unstaffed side, you really think about, oftentimes, it seems to me, cultivating them just like you would an individual in many ways.
Exactly. And I would use, we like to say foundations are people too, because at the end of the day, the decision to make the money, the decision to give away the money may not rest with just one person at the larger staff foundations, but they're still human beings who are working day in and day out on this. So building those relationships is immensely valuable. But yeah, when I see family foundations, when it's one or a couple that are pretty much running the show, you treat them largely like an individual donor. The process of submission is usually a lot less formal.
Right. Well, we got some good questions here. They're coming in hot. We appreciate it from everybody. And the next one feeds into what I wanted to ask you about anyway, Abigail. The specific question is this, and I'll tell you what I want. The general question is, the specific question from one of our guests is, what tone should you strike in a foundation proposal? Which is a really good question. And it goes to actually what Aaron was just talking about. And then maybe you could elaborate more, Abigail, on just more broadly how you communicate with foundations. The tone of the proposal is one thing, and then more broadly, it's like how communication happens with foundations.
Yes. Okay. Good question. I have a lot of thoughts on this. So in terms of like a proposal, the first thing you have to, kind of like what Aaron was saying, if it is a foundation that has specific requirements, if they're staffed, if they have guidelines, you follow those guidelines to the T. You answer this question specifically that they give you in the way, abiding by the word limit, and following their processes, respecting their processes. In terms of like the language that you use, the tone of your like the formal proposal itself, it should be I would say clarity is like number one. And it should be very easy to digest. These people are busy, so it should have a very like clear, like if it's an LOI, like what in the first two paragraphs, what are you asking of this foundation person to do?
What's an LOI?
Oh, sorry. Good question. Okay. So typically there's like two general, like formal written documents, or you might do this digitally too, that you would submit to a foundation. A letter of inquiry is typically pretty short. It's maybe like 2 pages. It's not a formal request for funding. It's usually asking like, would you be open to having a call with our president? Would you be open to us submitting a proposal? It's a letter of inquiry, an introductory we are interested in pursuing the possibility of a partnership. We think that our work can help you fulfill your foundation's mission, that sort of thing. A proposal, most foundations will say they don't accept proposals, but you can kind of send them a letter of inquiry as like a first step to initiate that process. Some foundations is more rare, they'll accept a proposal off the bat. That's a formal request for funding, typically longer, maybe like 8 to 10 pages, depending on like what you do, what your nonprofit does, and, the foundation that you're approaching. And it's a little bit more detailed, and it's an explicit request for funding.
And this is where you start talking just about the tone or the language.
Yeah. So the tone, I would say in both cases, it should be really clear and strong and easy to digest, because these people are very, very, very busy, and they might have stacks of these things on their desk. So it should be like very clear what you're asking them to do. It should be clear what your mission statement is. If it's a proposal, whether they've requested it or not, each section should be really clearly labeled. Here's the problem that we're addressing. Here's our impact. Here's our results. Here's our leadership. Here's our board. So make it easy for them to navigate. Don't make it hard for them.
Yeah.
So in terms of, the tone, I think it's important so a lot of foundations are big on like metrics and data, and certainly have that in, that's fine, but don't forget the emotional appeal.
Right.
I would say in foundation, it's easy to think that like, oh, this is just this big bureaucratic entity or whatever. But behind that, like they're human beings, like who are making decisions from the heart. So like, don't like leave that out. If you don't get caught up into the metrics and the data.
Right. A powerful illustrative story is not out of place, right? In a proposal.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Obviously it's going to be very different from a direct mail letter, right? Obviously it should be polished. It should be professional. It should be
a little bit less bold and underlining than
yeah. It should be formatted, in a really professional way, and, have some minimal design and that sort of thing. So
I would say controlled urgency, or, something like that almost is like, like you're straining to stay cool, but the issue is so powerful and compelling, it's almost hard to do.
Yeah.
If I could.
Yeah, and you need to have that in there. You need to have like, what is the problem? What is the urgency?
Yeah.
Why? You know, why should this foundation give you money? You know, what are you nonprofit doing? You know, to solve this problem?
I'd say I was going to add on to that just a little bit, both on that urgency, because I think that's important. And Abigail, what you're saying, like, get that up front, like, especially on an LOI, get that up front as quickly as possible. And one thing I was going to add on too is that, you know, when you talk about tone, it also talk about writing style. You don't necessarily feel the need to be overly flowery just because this is a super formal document. Now, if your nonprofit is involved in something like litigation, and that's like very on brand for your organization, maybe you're okay with doing it there. But outside of that, maybe one or two other examples we could think of.
Medical,
being over like long-winded and using super long words, or you know, going to the thesaurus just to pick a different, like, rarer word, like it's not going to help you communicate what you're trying to accomplish any better. Because like you said, you know, like there are people reading this who are trying to understand both what you're doing and why you're asking them for money in the first place. And the quicker and more concisely and compellingly you can get that in front of them, the better. You want to be detailed. You want to make sure they understand what you're doing, but don't be flowery for the sake of it.
Yeah.
Aaron, we have a question here. It's a question that we get in different forms all the time on this. Is a really good question. Well, this is going about trends in terms of how foundations are evaluating the success of their giving. Are we seeing, we have seen some trends blow through at Anfield anyway. I have in 13 years or so, although foundations are, one thing to keep in mind, they're wildly different from each other oftentimes. So, we oversell how much trends are probably coming through them. But, there was, a theory of change. For a while, everybody had to have a theory of change, if you were going to get a grant from a sophisticated foundation source. Anything you would want to say on that? Like, about how they might impact new approaches to a foundation, whether are they more towards project now, more multi-year now, infrastructure, capacity building?
Right. Well, part of my answer will actually build off of what you were saying, Abigail, which is when you look at how nonprofits try and measure success, which is easier for some than others, if we're being honest. I at least in the sector that I had done a lot more work in, I don't even want to call it a trend. Maybe it was more flash in the pan, but I felt like there was this deeper desire for very metric driven measures of success for a while. And you're talking about a space that's dealing with ideas and education, and putting metrics on that is incredibly hard to do sometimes. And just because you can't, at least as easily, doesn't mean you're not having an impact. Right. It's just harder to maybe show that in numbers. Right. At the end of the day, and this is what you were saying, Abigail, just like individual donors, your mission, what you're trying to accomplish in the long term, I think personally is still going to win out, even if you don't have that perfect way of putting a number to improving why it's successful. As far as breaking down a multi-year versus just annual grants. I haven't noticed any kind of upswing in any fad that's coming around, I guess. But touching on that, when foundations want to understand how you're successful, I think storytelling, even without any kind of numbers, is still just as powerful as it's always been.
Can I put it this way? Here's what I think is the truth. You got to have something you're measuring to overcome the objection that you're not measuring anything, and what we can't measure, we can't control. And we've heard all these things, right? But powerful stories will close the deal for you. That's how I look at it. I feel like there's a threshold. You got to overcome the objection. You got to have something, good measures, as good a measures you can come up with, as meaningful measures as you can come up with. You're going to track and all that stuff. Overcome the objection. Take that off the table. But you will not close the deal just with metrics. You will close the deal with powerful stories. A powerful story, about what you're doing and powerful stories, and then relationships, I guess, is the other part of that too, but we'll come back to that. That's, am I right? You think that's more or less?
I completely agree. I
Yeah.
completely agree. And if you have metrics that are, if you are an organization where that just comes more naturally based on the nature of your work, by all means use them.
Yeah.
But don't lean on them as the be all end all.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say too, like, just to be a little bit the devil's advocate, I think this was a point you actually made, Aaron. So I'm stealing your point that we talked about earlier, but maybe it's a good chance for you to think about, like, are there things we could measure that we aren't measuring? And maybe we should, kind of self-evaluate as an organization. Like maybe we actually can do more of this. And maybe that would be a good thing for us to kind of hold us more accountable. So, we're not like anti-metric, but it's more than that. So like, I sort of take a both and approach. Like if you have them, include them,
Well, we had one client, for instance, who shall go nameless, who the president was so metric focused that she could not understand why she needed to help build a relationship or be in a meeting or anything like that with the foundation. She just pass the sheet across the table to show the numbers are going to hit, and there you go. It's like investment deals in the business world don't work this way either. It's trust, it's relationships, it's belief. So it's just, people can go crazy on this stuff. That's all.
Because, sorry, one more thing, because what is the foundation asking for when they're asking for metrics? They want to know that like their money is doing good in the world. That's what they want to know. And so
I would say they also want to know that you're well run, right? It's a test. Or is this a well-run place? Because the bar in most of the nonprofit world isn't that high. And so if you can show, I'll just be totally honest with you, right? If you can show that, no, we thought about this. We know how we're going to, you're passing the, we can trust them because they're well-run test. I think that's what it really means.
Totally.
So I didn't cut you off.
No, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. More questions. I'm just going to the queue here. We got good stuff. Abigail, let's stick with you. You had a foundation that gave in the past. Somehow it lapsed. The questioner doesn't say why it lapsed, but we all know you can posit some scenarios yourself. How do you re-engage with them? It's been more than 10 years. They do say that. It's been more than 10 years. How would you re-engage?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything too deeply about this. I mean, I think I would start with a little bit of research. Who's the main contact? Has it changed? Has their giving changed since then? Like, who are they giving to now? If it's been 10 years, have they totally changed? Have they sunsetted? Do they even exist anymore? That happens a lot with foundations. They'll spend on all their assets. So start with a little bit of do your due diligence on the intel finding, and then reach out, and acknowledge the fact that 10 years or so ago, we're so grateful for the support you gave us back then. We'd love to reinitiate a conversation and share with you like all the work that we've done since then. Try to get a phone call. Just re-engage personally. Start cultivating them.
That sounds right.
I agree. I think in that kind of scenario, you have to go beyond just dropping an LOI in the mail and seeing what happens, because what could very well happen, especially in 10 years, maybe the odds are low, but if some of the same staff is still there, regardless of why they dropped off their giving, you're probably still in their system, and they're going to see you as a previous grantee, regardless of how big or small this grant making foundation is. In my mind, building that relationship and getting out in front of that and doing exactly what you said, Abigail, is paramount. Like, you have to get on the phone, or better yet, an in-person meeting, and go, hey, you were a very generous supporter of ours in the past. Here's what we're doing now. Here's what's exciting. Here's the impact we're having.
Yeah, if you
Let's
have
talk about
leadership, I would really highlight if you have new leadership in place, which may be the case. I'm going to go ahead and guess it's a place for the person who asked the question. You would highlight that, where you are now. That indicate if something went badly in the past. I don't think you need to bring that up straight out, but maybe subtly hint toward the fact that you understand that something went badly in the past. So good question. Good question.
You can always, start with a letter, but then don't leave it there. Like the letter's the excuse. This is kind of true for any kind of prospective foundation.
Right.
The letter's the excuse to engage.
Let's just hit that right now. They're not asking about it, but let's just hit it right now, because people don't ask about it. We end up having to tell them. How persistent do you have to be, Abigail, to make a foundation fundraising program work?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. That's something I think about a lot. So you have to be really persistent,
On a 1 to 10 scale, I would say it's like a 12, right?
Yeah. Yes. If you want results.
Yeah.
I mean, So so if you're serious about like starting a foundation program, you have no foundation funding, or like, and you want new foundation funders, obviously start like identify, likely prospects who are like actually aligned. Like, don't send an LOI to someone who is never going to fund you. Like, send an LOI, a letter of inquiry, to, foundations who you think might be aligned with what you're doing. And then so kind of like my rule of thumb is like within the first 2 weeks of that letter dropping, you need to call or email them 6 times until you get an answer. Yes, no, or maybe. And it takes a lot of time.
Let's pause on that.
Yeah.
6 times.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, don't even get into this world if you don't have somebody, you yourself or somebody isn't going to persistently follow up,
right?
Because they're not going to take you seriously otherwise, right?
Right. Yeah, because they're inundated, and it doesn't mean it's a no. Just because they don't get back to you doesn't mean it's a no. It means that like maybe their board meeting isn't until 6 months from now. They're not even thinking about who they're going to give to, or maybe they have a stack this big on their desk, or maybe they're traveling. You just have no idea. It doesn't mean a no. It just means you need to stand out and get to the top of their inbox and make them read that LOI. And it doesn't have to be.
Somebody on staff, Abigail, recently said, I forget who it was. I don't know if it was somebody on our team or a client, but some foundation, I may have been a donor, but it's either way. It's like, I'm after like the 6th call or whatever, finally called back, said, I just had to call back and I have to meet the person who's called me as many times as you have. And then I've been feeling bad about not calling you back. Let's meet. So yeah, you never know.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. So be really persistent. And then if you don't hear anything, reapproach them again, in another 6 months or something like that. So so another big like tip I would say for all of this is like establish a system to organize all of this so that you can kind of track what's happening. Like, okay, we sent them an LOI, 6 months ago, let's send them another one now and let's update it, that kind of thing.
I completely agree. My rule is assume nothing. If you haven't heard back, that's not a no. If you sent an LOI, I go ahead and assume, unless you've confirmed that you've received it, don't assume that they have. Things get lost in the mail. Things get put on a desk and left there. Things end up in a stack, like you said, Abigail, it's this tall. People are busy. If it's a staff foundation, particularly, yes, they have people designated to handle this thing, and that can help. And I would say for a staff foundation, particularly, be even more persistent. That's
right.
Why they're there.
Exactly.
Assume
bond to people like you.
Exactly. Yeah. And assume nothing, just like you would with anything else. Just because an email goes unresponded for a day or two does not mean you rub them the wrong way or it's a no. Right. Get in touch with them. And if they explicitly tell you this is not in our funding priorities, don't reach out again, then obviously to stop. But outside of that, until you get to that point and until you get in touch with them, keep
goes without saying, be winsome, be nice, be kind. If you can, be humorous. And to get them to take you, I'll answer a question of my own here. We're answering somebody's question kind of sideways here, and we'll get to it directly. There's the foundation, we're going to get a lot of inquiries, right? How do you stand out? It's not, it used to be, I remember when I was in school, it's like, put your resume on canary yellow paper. Well, that's not how you, that's not it. Obviously you don't want to give them any reasons to throw you in the trash can or delete the email. So you follow the guidelines, whatever. But I think you gotta pretty shamelessly name drop at the beginning. Mm-hmm. If there's anybody in your world that you're associated with, that they're associated with, like I would drop. Am I wrong about that, guys?
No, I think it's a really good idea, especially like if you have other funders that are like maybe well-known in that particular world or something like that, like a foundation that's also public, like, we've received support from like these 3 foundations, and that kind of signals some credibility to this
stamp of approval. That's all you're doing, that credibility.
Yep.
Right. Yep.
Yep.
Totally. But I think that gets to the heart of what we were talking about, which is that's still relationship building at the end of the day. You're finding the things you have in common and leaning into those.
But you have to say it. No,
you have to say it. Exactly.
You got to say
they're not going to know.
You can't be too shy. Like, well, gee. The other thing I would do, here's just another little random tip. Oftentimes people think, well, our board member does know somebody over there, and I'll wait for the board member. She said she's going to make an introduction and put in a good word, and they'll never do it. They never do it. They always get off their radar. Here's how you crack that. Okay. Send it in, then write the board member and say, we sent in the LOI or the proposal to such and such foundation. Would you mind dropping a word? Now it's so much easier for them to say, hey, whatever, Teresa, FYI, I know that so-and-so whose board I'm on sent you this proposal. It'd be great if you could take a look at it, whatever. That's a lot easier for board members to do, or whomever in your world, a donor, a contact or something, to follow up on something you've already done rather than waiting for them to do it, because it just won't get done.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So we're actually kind of answering a question here. Somebody asked about case studies from our work, which we can draw on different examples here. How do you take clients from 0 to 60 when it comes to foundation? How do you really get a program up and running? What needs to be built out? What kind of mindset maybe needs to be changed in order for this to work?
Yeah.
Either one of you take that.
Well, I'll touch, Abigail, if you want to touch on more of the day in, day out work. One thing I'd like to touch on is the mindset part. One of the toughest things I've seen with organizations who are starting either from square one or are still very early on their foundations program building is understanding that it's a long-term play, and understanding that unlike an individual donor who could in theory cut you a check before you leave lunch with them, that's not how a vast majority of foundations work. Even family foundations, even if it's just 1 or 2 people running them, are not typically allowed to do that kind of thing. So understand it's a long-term play. Understand you might be declined the first time, but there's still a victory in getting in front of them and getting your work in front of them. And that, again, the one thing I would say is not different though, and we mentioned it already, is that all the principles of working with individual donors are largely the same. You have to build the relationships. You have to stay connected with them. You have to tell them what you're doing and report on what you're doing, just like you would anyone else. But it really is it's that long-term mentality and understanding that in a vast majority of foundations, you can only ask for money once a year. You're going to get 1 grant a year. And you can't typically you can't come back for another one. Right. And they might, the other part on this I'll say is that sometimes when you're looking at how much they're giving to other similar organizations, not getting caught up in, well, they're giving $100,000 to group A and we're doing even more than they are, so we can ask for $200,000 as a first-time gift. No, it's just like anything else. Again, back to the relationship building. You have to build that trust. You have to show them impact within the context that we already talked about, and grow from there. So yeah, it's that long-term mentality that I think has to be in place, and it's not going to be you're not going to see this. You'll see success, and you might see some immediate success, but getting it to where you ultimately want to be is not going to happen overnight. But you have to put the work in now, because it's got to start at some point.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That having that long-term mentality. So many clients will give up so quickly,
I know,
a couple of months, and they get no traction. And then it can sometimes take 18 to 24 months from cold initial inquiry to cash in the bank. I'll give you one example. So a client, actually new nonprofit. So actually starting 0 to 60 with foundation grants. We summer of 2020, we sent a totally cold LOI to a foundation. Did some aggressive follow-up, warmly received, had some conversations, and then maybe in the spring. So this is spring 2021, had a Zoom meeting with their whole board and that kind of thing, really positive, all of this. They didn't get the check from this foundation, but there was very little information on when this board would, again, foundations are also different, right? No one knew when this board was meeting, and but got a check in October 2021. So over a year, from cold, outreach to check it. But what this client, so another point, which I love about this story, is what this client did really, really, really well, is that they never stopped cultivating this foundation. Even if the foundation didn't say, they were very positive, obviously, but they didn't say yes right away. They didn't give a grant right away. But this client stayed in touch with them, sent them personal emails, calls, texts, updates on the work, all kinds of things. So the importance of that personal relationship building and the cultivation. I think we forget to cultivate prospective funders. If they don't give a grant right away, well, then move on to someone else. Well, wait, keep them on your list, stay in touch with them every quarter, keep them in your orbit and update them on your work. Unless they've given you a hard no, you should do that because it paid off. So
you go 0 to 60, everything you guys are saying, that is the most important thing. And I'll tell you, it's what separates the the big dogs from the puppies. Tell you what is the patience, the long-term outcome. Like we're doing this for I'm planning for 3 to 5 to 10 years from now. And it's pretty uncommon to have leaders who think that way. It will spend some money now, some resources now to get a foundation program up and going when you know the real payoff is going to come in year 3 and forward. Very hard. And they'll tell you that, but we know oftentimes we're them like by midway through year 1, it's like, this isn't working. We told you. We told you. So hard to get started. Once you get the ball rolling though, just like anything else in fundraising, it gets going pretty well. It'll be your best ROI on time spent in development. Ultimately, would be the foundations if you really get it going, because the payoffs can be big chunks, and it doesn't take that much. You don't have to babysit a foundation rep, even though they are people too, like we've been saying, as much as you might, the old guy you got to visit every month and take him his medicine, and he's your major. We know all the things that major gift officers do, right? Keep those relationships going. So that's the main thing. You got to have a system. I would say you got to have a system to manage it. You got to stay persistence. We've already talked about that. And the third thing that we haven't brought up here, and I just want to make sure we bring out here, guys, is you got to do a lot. You're building a sales funnel. Okay. So it is not picking out like 7 foundations. And yeah, we'll probably get 3 of these. It may take a while to get, no, you won't. You're probably going to get 0 of 7, right? Maybe over time you get 1. That's just not big enough. You've got to, there's a lot of not going to say no, or not going to get back to you, or others you get through and you don't know. Others take more time. Finally, you get down to the ones who are ready to go right now. So, we're never starting a foundation program with a client without 50 to 100 prospects that we're going to go at. We identify and we start going after, and then we add to it after that.
Yeah.
So, that's, and there are exceptions to all that, but I think that's what I would say to that. Very good question. All right. Very quick question. Because we hit on this, to Aaron. What do you say, or whoever said this, it was Abigail. What do you say on the 6th time that's either the same or different than the first time you contacted the foundation? Good question.
Is that to Aaron or to me?
That's you. This is what he said 6 times.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Abigail.
Yeah. That's a good question. I know it could be awkward, right? You feel like you're being annoying, like you're saying the same thing over and over again. So, I mean, again, it could be human and be real. Like, hey, I just, I know I've been calling you a lot. I just wanted to try again. I'd really love to connect. If you have a chance to read the LOI, the letter I sent you, that'd be great. I can send you another one if you'd be interested. Thanks so much for your time. Here's my number.
You have to come off like a holy fool, it seems to me. Like somebody's just won't get the point, and I think it can be endearing if you can do it, right? Yeah.
And acknowledge the fact that you've called 6 times,
sorry, that's fine, calling, but I know you're also very busy. And so
yes, totally.
You called me 5 times, I haven't gotten back to you. So I understand, whatever you can be kind of.
Yeah. And thank you, thank you for your time. Thanks for listening to this message, that kind of thing.
I've used, so I always try to be a little bit careful of the excuse that I give to reach back out again. And I think a vast majority of the time, it's just be honest. Like, don't make up, I know I've called you 5 times, but on the 6th time, I noticed something in the LOI I needed to correct with you. Just give me a call back. I'll just be like, hey, I didn't want the week to end without me calling you again. So here we are on Thursday or Friday, and I'm just reaching back out. I know you're busy. Get back to me when you can. And then oftentimes I'll say, and by the way, I'm going to call you again. I'm going to call you again next Wednesday if I don't hear back from you.
That's good. I like
be
that.
Careful, be careful. Obviously, use your best judgment, but the persistence does matter.
You will be hearing from me again. Well, this is really a good question. It touches on some things we've already talked about. And we will get to all these questions. I'll be doing a lightning round starting in 2 minutes. So we'll get everything. How important is it, Darren, to develop a personal relationship with a program officer at a big foundation? Do they encourage personal visits or introductory calls? How does that work?
Yeah, so I think it's incredibly important because they are your conduit to the board more often than not. They're the ones who are going to tell you, hey, this project's a great fit. This project isn't, but how can we possibly make it work? They can make sure you stay on track with the guidelines in the submission process. They can also give you a heads up. If you have a strong relationship with one and you come to mind, they can give you a heads up. Hey, look, the board is delaying the meeting, or hey, we're actually shifting our focus a little bit. Like that kind of, I'm gonna say insider information, but maybe behind the scenes stuff, they're incredibly helpful with. I don't want to lean too much on it is their job, so like take advantage of that. But if you're talking about the one connection, if you could only choose one, the one connection you can make to a foundation outside of the board, and even then, I might argue that it's the strongest one, I do it with them. I tend to lean towards treating them just like I would anyone in the donor field that I'm trying to cultivate. Go to lunch with them, meet them at events if they're at events that you're at. If you're in their state and they have an office, or even if they don't, try and connect with them. Keep them updated. Maybe the grant requirements only require an annual report, or maybe one report every 6 months. Send them stuff every month if it makes sense. Don't make stuff up. Don't come up with something just for the sake of it necessarily, but make them feel involved, make them feel informed about your organization, and just like you would a donor, get to know them as a person. I can't overemphasize it enough. Just personally, I think that that's the most important relationship you're going to have with the foundation, unless for some reason you're incredibly close with a couple of key board members.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to give a little bit of plug here quickly. If you then we'll get to the lightning round. We're going to get the rest of these questions out. If this is at all helpful to you, we have a webinar coming up February 17th. Candid advice fundraisers from foundation leaders. So you can hear from foundation leaders themselves, ask them questions. That is February 17th, 4 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for that at AmericanPhilanthropic.com/events. Then we also have a masterclass on the elements of grant writing that is really taking you through writing a grant proposal in detail from one of our senior experts on this topic. That is on March 3rd. And you can also sign up for that on our website. I believe I have all of this correct. Finally, last thing, if we have our intensive training, one-on-one, 2-day training, Elements of Fundraising in Phoenix on March 4th, you can still sign up for that. If you use a code EARLYBIRD, you get a $250 discount, and you can sign up for that also on our website, AmericanPhilanthropic.com/events. Okay, sorry for the commercial, but wanted you all to know that. 3 things coming up that may or may not be interesting to you. All right, lightning round, guys. Aaron.
Yes.
You ready? Give us
I think so.
30 seconds. This is
all right.
Do you have a sense of what metrics are generally helpful to the foundations you work with? How do you strike the right balance between metrics and narrative?
Ooh, 30 seconds. That's incredibly hard to answer. It's like I said, if your organization is maybe better set up based on the work you do to hit metrics. Big picture stuff. If you're feeding people, if you're saving whales or whatever, like obviously stick with those numbers, number of whales saved, number of people fed, that's what matters. But again, to emphasize, tie all that back into stories. If you fed 20,000 people, tell me about 3 of them and how that just intimately impacted their lives. I lean a little bit, I would say 50-50, or maybe even lean a little bit even more into the storytelling. Again, I think it depends on what kind of organization you are, and how big you are. The kind of metrics they care about, again, that actually depends on and the kind of work you're doing.
Hard to answer. Just
something that
shows
to answer,
real impact, what I would say. Something
exactly. But I'll use that as a chance to plug, like, don't skip the storytelling.
Don't skip the storytelling. Abigail, hey, what happens when you encounter the foundation phrases only pre-selected grantees or no unsolicited proposals?
Yeah, a lot of foundations will say this, right? And I always say send an LOI anyways, because you never know.
Yes. In fact,
I've never once let that stop me.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Probably should have
no unsolicited one. That's just a thing they click in foundation directory. Yeah, right. It should not stop you. We've seen checks come back from LOIs from foundations that said that. So
yeah.
Anecdotally, out of all the years I've been doing this, only once have I gotten a semi-ugly response for for applying or sending something to one where they said,
will occasionally happen. It's just like the
but it's incredibly rare. Incredibly rare.
Yeah, whatever. They're getting a special status for this. That's how I always look at it. I don't let my mind forget that. Like, hey, you found a place to park your $10 million tax free. You can accept the fact that I'm sending you a letter. Abigail, but foundation requires a matching grants. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Question to
that's
answer quickly.
not super common in my experience. And typically when I have seen that, I have seen it. It's typically when a foundation already has a relationship with the nonprofit. And so they're kind of like trying to kind of help that particular nonprofit. So it's usually, maybe not like a cold foundation, but like something that would happen in the context of an existing relationship with a grantee. So I would say, obviously advertise that. Other foundations like, and donors in general sometimes really like matching grants. So it can be a really good thing.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Aaron, our foundation is pivoting to more virtual and Zoom calls than in prior years, obviously if everything's going on. How does that change things, basically, in foundation approaches?
Yeah, I mean, just like anything, it shifted for a while there. Individual donors were in the same boat. I have found, typically the person you're going to have the relationship with is some kind of grant director, or if it's a unstaffed foundation, it's the patriarch or matriarch of that family foundation. I haven't seen it shift radically differently than it did with individual donors. When individual donors were doing Zoom calls and weren't taking in-person meetings, the same was true of foundations. And now that we've seen things open up quite a bit more, I found there's a lot of grant officers that are very much back to being open to doing in-person meetings as well. If you can't, there is now that kind of built-in convenience in this now like post-Zoom world that we're in, that I actually see a great deal of opportunity with, because there are folks who would only do in-person meetings, maybe phone calls, who are now much more open to Zoom calls. So I think it's actually benefited us quite a bit in the foundation's fundraising space. Very
good. Well, we're just about up to time, so we'll wrap it up here. There's a link that's been put into the chat to the masterclass, I believe, for March 3rd. And somebody pointed out, I don't know what happened on our website. The February 17th event isn't up there. I don't know if we're rethinking that event. Check back tomorrow. We can also, we'll probably email people on here with a link when that's up and ready to go if you want to sign up for that February 17th webinar with the foundation leaders. It may be Jeremy's fault that I wasn't supposed to yet talk about that, but I guarantee, I'm pretty sure it's coming. But certainly the March 3rd masterclass is happening, and Elements of Fundraising 2-day seminar here in Phoenix. If you're really interested in getting, that's really meant for more inexperienced fundraisers, or people who are coming into fundraising or experiencing something else, maybe even nonprofit leadership, but want to really get a good backing and fundraising. It's really good for people like that. So thank you, Abigail and Aaron. Appreciate your time. Yeah. My Scotch is also gone. I hope everybody else had a good hour. Perfectly. And thank you for, the link is there. We found the link. It's there in the chat, so you can hang out here a little bit and let you click on it. But thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. And let us know if there's anything we can do for you. Take care.